Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back to Israel we go. Stephen Flatow joined us again, an American lawyer. He's notable for initiating a series of lawsuits targeting the Islamic Republic of Iran, international banks for terrorism. His beloved daughter Lisa was killed by Hamas Islamic Jihad in 1995, and he currently was just appointed the president of Religious Zionists of America, Mizrahi, and he's also responsible for the Flatow Amendment, which allows American victims of terrorism to sue countries that are designated as terrorism sponsors. Good to speak with you again in Israel, in Jerusalem.
Same here, Zev.
First of all, how are things in your area? What are you telling us from the street? What's happening? What's the mood at this moment?
I'm living right now in the German colony, right on Emigraphy. Immediately after the war started, it reminded me of the COVID lockdown. The streets were empty, stores were shuttered. Now, after 3 weeks, we're seeing more activity on the street. Yet what's conspicuous in their absence are young men in their 20s and 30s. They've all been called up. They all went back to active service. The shops here are curtailing their hours. There's just nobody out shopping. I mean, dinner hour is busy. The buses are relatively quiet. I was downtown Jerusalem today, and I won't call it a ghost town, but certainly didn't have the mobs of people on the street. There are no American tourists. There are no American tourists unless they come by El Al. As I'm sure you and your viewers and listeners know, that the three major American airlines, United, American, and Delta, have canceled their flights to and from Israel. At the beginning of the war, much to my chagrin, a goodly number of American students were dragged back to the States by their parents after the Chagim. They're starting to come back now. But I was in the Old City today. There was a terror attack about 15 minutes before I got there. So I don't know if that's why it was quiet, but I tend to walk through the Arab Shuk to get to the Kotel, and there wasn't a tourist anywhere except me and my friend. The only two people walking in the Shuk, and in that respect, it's depressing. But up the street from me is a community center, and they have a big mosaic on the outside wall, quoting the Pasukim from Zechariah. But I will return you to Jerusalem, and the old men and the old women leaning on their canes. That's my wife and I. Will sit and relax, and the children shall play in the streets of Jerusalem. And after 3,000 years, we're here. So that's what gets me through the days. I try to control my anxiety the best I can. Someone said, "Why don't you go back to New Jersey if you're anxious?" And I said, "I would be just as anxious there as I would be here. So I might as well be here with my people."
Now you are, and also, are you seeing? There's a tremendous amount of unity in Israel. I think there's also amount of patriotism, Zionism, even Haredim I've seen with the Israeli flag. Are they becoming Mizrahi too, or is it just carrying the Israeli flag? I want to know, because you're now president. I know it's the United States of religious Zionists, but I want to know how it's affecting Israeli Haredim and Israeli Jews.
Well, we're seeing men who are enlisting in the IDF. Their rabbis will say, "Well, these are guys who are finished Kollel, they're finished with yeshiva, and they can go ahead and do that." But we didn't have that 5 years ago. We didn't have that 2 years ago. And I've always believed that, look, I'm an Ola Chadash. I'm a new citizen, right? And I'll always be a new citizen because I have never been and will never be able to go into the army. When my son was here, he's been here about 15 or 16 years. He didn't become a citizen for 2 years. 2 years, and then he was immediately drafted. And that's what gave him the citizenship. being a new citizen is one thing, but being in the IDF, that's like the ticket to the future for you. Everybody respects you at that point in time. So I know over the years there have been many religious Jews here. Let's call them modern Orthodox, call them Orthodox, who used to press the Haredi community to go into the IDF, and the boys would just avoid it. But now, as you just said, we're seeing boys go into, young men, not boys, but young men going into these brigades. Some of them are 25, 26, so they most probably will never see combat. But at the same time, we need the support staff, we need drivers, we need cargo handlers, we need all that kind of stuff. And I think it's a great signal for the future that the Haredim are going to become a more integral part of Israeli society.
And that means doing some sort of national service, even if they don't go into the army. And like you said, over here, there are a lot of positions that need to be filled with people who are in the IDF. So they're helping society by filling in whatever needs to be done.
It's funny. I signed a sheet that went around asking for people who are willing to volunteer at hospitals, even if you don't speak Hebrew, and that's me. So I haven't gotten the call yet, but I said I'd be glad to come in. I was at Hadassah Medical Center a couple of weeks ago, and I met with a couple of victims whose injuries at the time were miraculously taken care of by the surgeons at Hadassah. But what struck me is that there was a woman. I spoke to her mother first. This woman has 10 children. And every other Shabbos or so, she and her husband load up their car with some of their kids, and they bring food, and they go to a base near Gaza to make Shabbos for the soldiers. And she got hit in the arm and fractured with a bullet, and fractured her upper arm. She has some shrapnel in her chest. The doctors said they're going to leave it alone because they don't want to go digging into the muscle. But her spirits were just phenomenal. And she went to make Shabbos for these boys. Now, whether these boys knew what Shabbos was before she got there, I have no idea. But the fact of the matter is, here's a woman with serious nefesh. She took her family down south, rather than being comfortable in her own house, to spread the joy of Shabbos with some strangers.
So are you finding overall a more of a religious feeling in Israel, more of a nationalistic feeling in Israel because of the situation? What are you seeing on the ground?
I'm seeing more of a nationalistic feeling. Look, my experiences here in Israel, until about 15, 20 years ago, is you could talk to an adult my age who actually knew what Shabbat was, who had heard of the Torah, who had heard of a Gemara, the Talmud, and the Mishnah, and their kids, though, with a problem. Their kids were not brought up in any sort of tradition. Even though the parents had the background, there was no Jewish education for them. So what we're seeing now, in my opinion, is we're seeing a new rebirth of nationalism. And I think that when you look at the IDF populations now, you're seeing more Dati Leumi religious soldiers in the army who are able to make that contact, who are able to spread what they know over their little battalion, over their little platoon, whatever it is. I was fortunate in the summer to be with the religious Zionists of Chicago, and they had dedicated a Sefer Torah for military bases up in the Shomron. And you had to see the faces on the soldiers when they danced with the Torah. You just had to see it. And these weren't religious boys. So they're trying to create the spark, relight the spark. That, I guess, Pintel Yid is the old Yiddish phrase, right? Everyone has a bit of Yid in their heart. They're trying to relight that. And I think we're going to be successful in the long run.
I hope so, because while Israel's become united, but I am hearing murmurs. You probably hear it more in Israel. People saying the government is responsible for what happened. They're waiting till after the war is over. I spoke to Michael Oren. He said there has to be accountability. The feeling is even the prime minister today is numbered as being prime minister of Israel. There's going to be a whole shakeup, probably not in the very near future, but soon, especially when this whole conflict ends. Is that what you're hearing?
Yes, I'm hearing the same thing. People are not happy with the formation of the government, and I mean the formation, how these governments get set up with these crazy coalition arrangements and things like that. I've heard talk about people wanting term limits again here for a prime minister, especially. I don't know how that works in a constitutional parliamentary system, because you still could be a member of the parliament, but you can't, basically you're not allowed then to be the head of the list per se. So I don't know how that works in practice. There were direct elections of the prime minister, I think twice, going back about 10 or so years. And I think when Bibi won the second time, they did away with that. So to an American who's used to a bicameral legislature, this Knesset, to me, is unworkable. It's a polygon. I mean, I have never been inside during a live session or anything like that, but I'm told it's like a free-for-all, screaming, shouting, yelling, total lack of respect for each other. But hey, that's Israel.
Right. Stephen Flatow is our guest, an American lawyer. His daughter Eliza, unfortunately, was killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in 1995. He's just became president of Religious Zionists of America, Mizrahi. One of the problems that we're facing, and I know you can speak to it, unfortunately, from a personal basis, your daughter Eliza was killed by the same Hamas, Islamic Jihad terrorists, is that Israel was lulled to thinking they could make a deal with Hamas. And each time they use that lull to become stronger and stronger, you tried also to hold the Iranian government responsible by lawsuits. But at the end of the day, Iran is still strong, more powerful. They've had sanctions, some sanctions relief. They've been getting money, including from our government. You see how strong Hezbollah is from Iran. You see Hamas is. The same Hamas Islamic Jihad terrorists are stronger today because of the lull. How do you view it? How do the Israelis view this? Because at the one hand, they're fighting them now. There may be a ceasefire, but these people are going to be around again. And even Hezbollah in Lebanon is more dangerous than Hamas. And if we don't get them now, they're going to continue with the patronage of Iran.
Well, the bottom line to the terror operations, going back to 93, 94, 95, Lisa was killed, was money. Back then, the money primarily came from Iran. And that was why we sued them, because we were able to track the funds from Iran to Islamic Jihad, which they drove the van. Islamic Jihad drove the van with a bomb made by Hamas. And at the time, even in America, they were saying, oh, Hamas is really, it's got some militant guys in it, but it's really a social services organization.
But the two different factions. You have the terrorist faction. They don't call them terrorists, I don't think. And you have the humanitarian one that's providing for their people, social welfare, right? Isn't that what they're saying?
Right, because the Palestinian Authority were a bigger bunch of crooks. So the Palestinian Authority was not letting any money get to the street. Hamas was taking the money that they were getting from Iran and using that, to placate the people in the street. Now, over the last 5 years, what happened is Israel looked the other way. In fact, encouraged Qatar to send money to Hamas to buy quiet, and that money has come back to bite us on the proverbial tuchus. Israel has intercepted so many dual-purpose items going into Gaza that you can't even make a joke of it. But meanwhile, they had hang gliders. They were practicing with hang gliders to fly into these communities. They were able to get rubber motorized rafts to come in, from the strip into Zikim along the shore. So all this was done with money, and a lot of it was with Israel's blinking it away. And that will be one of the items that has to be discussed. There's only one country in the world that can stop Iran, and that's the United States of America. And every time it tried to do so, though, it was undercut by the European nations, and they wouldn't join. They wouldn't join. It turns out, for instance, in the late 1990s, when I was pursuing Iranian assets, we located some assets in Italy. And the Italian courts threw me out quicker than you could say boo. Why? Well, the grounds were that this is not an appropriate venue to hear this type of case, but the real grounds, they were Iran's #1 trading partner. And if you remember, Bill Clinton thought that he could cozy up to Iran by lifting sanctions on pistachio nuts, caviar, and carpets. And all the Iranians ever did was spit in his face. And of course, we had, Yamach Shemo Yasser Arafat, and he sold Clinton, and he sold Bush about I want to make peace, and here's the offers, from Israel. And I had the opportunity when he was no longer prime minister to speak to Ehud Barak at a dinner, and I said, "Is it true you offered everything that people are saying, including part of Jerusalem?" He goes, "Yeah," and I said, "And?" He says they didn't even counteroffer. Which fits into what we're seeing today. When Yitzhak Rabin came to my house in May of 1995, we sat in my living room, and I asked him how he could be dealing with Yasser Arafat. And he had that deep voice, and he said to me, "Make no mistake, the man was a terrorist, he is a terrorist, will always be a terrorist, and he's surrounded by terrorists. But he's the head of the PLO, so I have to deal with him." Who was his #2 man? Mahmoud Abbas, the Holocaust denier, the Jew hater. And that's who we're trying to.
That's the moderate, right?
Yeah, the moderate, the terrorist.
The moderate terrorist, yeah.
Because he didn't wear a uniform. He's no longer wearing a uniform.
He wore a tie. There's no longer the same kind of terror, right?
Correct. And look, if you dissent from what they're saying in Ramallah, they throw you in prison. They lock you up. They don't see you again. Or they torture you to death. And they drop your body off in the street someplace. One of the things I've tried to really understand over the years is what is Arab society? And it really isn't a society. It's a series of clans. And as American Jews, we don't say, well, my clan are the Bialystalkers. We don't say that. I'm Flatow and you're Brenner and this one is that and this one is that. But we're not clans. We don't have bloodlusts. We don't have honor killings because you look cockeyed at somebody. And for Western people, it's impossible for us to accept that. You saw what happened in Russia last night, in a place called Dagestan, another one of these autonomous republics that were part of the Soviet Union. It's like something like 80% Muslim and the rest are Christians and some Jews. And they heard that an Israeli plane was landing, so they attacked the airport. They attacked the airport, and the Jews were hiding in the terminal. But you have to see pictures of these guys. They're looking inside the jet engines to make sure the Jews aren't hiding in the jet engines. This is a craziness. And I don't know how to deal with it. I just don't know how to deal with it.
Now, you tried dealing with it by suing and having lawsuits against the Iranian government to try to bankrupt them. What is the status of that? Is there any lawsuits at all going on?
Well, I'm sure there are suits going on. The problem that people have is collecting. We were fortunate. We were able to play our political cards right in 1999, and we got Bill Clinton to the administration to sit down with not just my family, but with about a dozen other families who were victimized by Iranian-backed terrorists, including Hezbollah and Hamas. And there was some money that we obtained, and everybody else is basically now, that they've got nice judgments, but trying to collect on them is nigh on impossible.
Now, let me ask this question. $6 billion are held by Qatar, which supposedly is frozen by our government because of the terrorist incursion on October 7th. Is it possible to bring lawsuits now against from the 1,400 Israeli victims of Hamas terrorism, with Iran being the sponsor, to maybe go after that $6 billion and for humanitarian purposes to help the Israelis?
Well, the answer is yes. Where's the lawsuit going to be brought? Back in the United States, not everybody will have access to the courts of the United States. Israeli courts have been loath to try to hold Iran to account.
Why?
People who have
Why?
it's politics. It's politics. It's politics. The PLO and the Palestinian Authority have been held to account in certain cases, and then the Supreme Court tossed them out here. In America, they were treated in different ways. Well, they're not a state, so you can't sue them under the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act statute. So it's a mess.
Because I don't know if they're videos, but it's a known fact. It's been reported that these Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists trained for this mission in Iran. It's over a year, maybe longer, that this whole terrorist escapade was being planned and thought about, and Iran was certainly there and helping guide it, not only funding it but training them. It would seem to me that they could be held and should be held liable in an American court.
Well, there's actually an American statute that gives the United States jurisdiction over hostage takers. So I've tried reaching out to the Justice Department. I did an article a couple of weeks ago suggesting now's the time to indict the leadership of Hamas in America, because we have these dual citizens who've been taken to Gaza, and it gives American courts jurisdiction. And get the indictment out there. Get the indictment out there. Put something over their heads. Now, the question is, we don't have, all right, so they're going to do an indictment. They're not going to tell us about it. They're just going to have it in the background. But we don't have an extradition treaty with Qatar. The Jordanians have just ignored their obligations for the last 20 years. They couldn't care less, despite the fact that Israel and the United States are supporting the government, keeping it propped up. And then you have the Meshuggah of them all, this guy Erdogan in Turkey, who once again, he has flipped 180 degrees on Israel 2 weeks ago. He was ready to sit down and talk to Bibi and talk to the government and warm up relations. And now he wants to play himself as the new caliph or caliph of the Muslim world. So I believe as of yesterday, Israel was calling back its ambassador,
which I believe had already left already. Stephen Flatow, American lawyer, is our guest. His daughter Lisa Flatow was killed by Islamic terrorists, Hamas, Islamic Jihad in 1995. He was instrumental in suing and getting the right to sue under the Flatow Amendment Iran and others that sponsored terrorism. He's currently the president of Religious Zionists of America, Mizrahi. Putting on your Mizrahi hat. So in America, also, you mentioned in Israel, there's lack of a Zionist education. In America, it's probably worse.
Worse. There is none.
There is none. Okay.
There is none. And we can see that, unfortunately, with Jewish students on college campuses. They don't know which way to turn. And even in our yeshivas, the modern-day Zionism does not get the attention that it should. So one of our plans is to work closely with the World Zionist Organization, which has an education department for the diaspora. And what we're hoping to do over the next year or two is to bring in, I'll use the word shlichim for lack of a better, teachers into the high schools who can teach these children, and that's what they are. They're still high school, but they're still children in my eye, the real foundations of the modern state of Israel. I mean, it's nice to talk about King David, and it's nice to talk about King Solomon and the prophets and the other Nevi'im. It's nice to talk about that. But really, the last 100 years between Herzl and Jabotinsky, of all people, to see this actually come about was politics. And our kids just don't know it. They simply don't know it. I've been with my grandchildren on Har Herzl, and I tried to explain to them who Herzl was, and I took them over to Jabotinsky's grave and explained who he was. And you get a blank look. You get a blank look.
But you also get that religious instruction. For example, we had great Zionist leader, Rabbi Cook, both Rev Cooks, who, and even in the religious world, they don't appreciate who he was. The Chafetz Chaim walked out of the convention where he was being vilified. You had he was connected to some of the big Gedolim, and yet nobody knows, or very few, I shouldn't say nobody, very few people know about that. That should also be part of the education.
Correct.
So you have your work cut out for you.
Well, what I'm hoping to do is galvanize our membership to participate in it. I'm trying to not be the sole activist on behalf of religious Zionism. And what's so interesting is I was able to participate, as I mentioned to you before we went on the air, with the Conference of Presidents at a mission here 2 weeks ago, and Jews of all stripes, from unsure to Orthodox, were in this group, and but in their heart, they are 100% Zionist and Israeli in their heart. Look, I made Aliyah. You know, if you were to say to me, "Why'd you do it?" I would say, "Zev, Roz and I spoke about it 50 years ago, and I was a young lawyer. What am I going to do here to Israel 50 years ago?" And about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, we started making trips here 2 or 3 times a year, spending 10 days at the Plaza Hotel and then the Inbal. And we were sitting in the dining room at the Inbal for breakfast, and it just struck me. And I said, "Now's the time to move, right? You're 72 years old. Let's do it." So I said to Roz, "We're making Aliyah." And she put down her coffee cup. She said, "Okay." And she picked it back up and was drinking. But I know it was going through her brain. She was saying to herself, "This guy never follows up on anything."
Humor him.
Exactly. And we got back on a Sunday, and I immediately went online to find out what I had to do and do it. And I started ordering documents and papers and letters from my rabbis and copies of birth certificates and apostilles and paying for this and paying for that, getting my letter that I'm not a criminal. And March comes around, and I have an appointment to take her to the Jewish agency here, Misrat Hapnim, actually, in Har Homa, to become citizens. And I still don't think she believed it until after we had these cards in our hand, you know. We didn't do the Nefesh B'Nefesh route. We did it on our own. And they arranged for us to have an English-speaking clerk handle all our paperwork. And all the forms we had filled out, she basically retyped into the system as we sat there. And I'm saying, this has to be Israel, right?
Bureaucracy.
Yes. So we finish, and she slides these big temporary ID cards across the counter to us. And she says, "Here you go." I said, "That's it?" She goes, "Yeah, you're citizens." So I said, "Where's the balloon?"
You have to pledge allegiance to the state of Israel?
No, where are the balloons? Where are the musicians? Where's the party? Where are the noisemakers? And she said something to me that still brings tears to my eyes. She said, "Welcome home." And that's what it is. That's what it is. So I tell people, you know, if we're together, I say, "I'm an Ola Chadash, and I've had it happen to me in the Shuk in Machne Yehuda. You know, welcome home." And what a feeling to hear that. Just
No, it's powerful. But I guess if you want the party, you got to go with Nefesh B'Nefesh, right?
yes.
But you did it on your own, but welcome home, which it is.
Yes.
Before
the day after, I have to tell you, the day after we got our citizenship,
yes,
was the day of the first COVID lockdown.
oh my,
We
wow.
were stopped cold in our tracks. So I said, "We got to go back to the States." They gave us an exit pass, and we came back a month later when things were actually starting to open up again. And we met with our immigration representative, and it was typical Israel. We're in a small room, and she wants to explain our benefits to us. Now, she's originally from France. She has a French accent. She's sitting 6 feet away from Roz and I in this office. And not only is she wearing a mask, but she's got the face shield.
Uh-huh.
I still don't know what she said. She handed me a bunch of papers that we were done with phone numbers.
You could have been speaking French as far as you're concerned.
It was impossible. But we were able to open a bank account. You know, we finally did that. And don't tell your viewers this, but the nicest part about making Aliyah is when they send you that $100 a month to help you pay your rent.
And how long did they do that for?
A year, 12 months.
Okay. And if you have kids, you can get free, at least free tuition for.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then I got a reduction in my real estate taxes. It was like, woo.
No,
you know?
I left. Before that, your Rabbi Doron Peretz is the head of the World Mizrachi, a dynamic leader. We've had him on this program over the course of time. I know one of his sons was wounded by these Hamas terrorists, and one is abducted by them. I believe he's believed to be in Gaza, as far as we understand. Tell us about how he is. He's a strong leader, but it's just a terrible, just to personalize what's going on. And he, I think, personifies that. It just, my heart went out when I saw that online.
Well, originally, the son who was wounded was supposed to get married near the end of October. And they moved it up to last week. He had been discharged from the hospital. He was back at home, and they got married. The other boy was in the tank corps. I was told that they located the tank, but nobody was in it. It was in an area that was still having direct combat between IDF and Hamas. So they didn't know if he had been taken or if he was literally in the bushes someplace, hiding out, something like that. Now we found out that there actually was one dead Chayal in the tank. It wasn't his son. So he's been listed as missing in action. I haven't looked at the official list of hostages. It's just too hard. So I don't know if he's being treated by the government as a hostage. The number has gone up now, I think, to 229 or 230.
Changes. I think it might have been more from what I've heard, but
right.
Officially.
Right. And today I was at Safra Square, and they had 230 beds, basically unmade, pillows and blankets and teddy bears and things like that, representing one for each hostage. And maybe I am Israeli because it gets you right in the chest. It gets you right here. The one thing Israelis can do, I think, is they do great museums, number one, but number two, they know how to show pain. They know how to demonstrate it to the rest of the world. Not that the world is listening. We're listening. You're listening.
Right.
Your listeners are listening. The rest of the world couldn't maybe care.
I do have to say, maybe the general world doesn't, but individuals, I've been approached by Christians and other good people who said, and they were sincere, that they're with us. They're just so sorry about what happened. So there is the good, decent people, I think, are sympathetic. But you're right, governments and all these real politics where they're just appeasing Hamas and appeasing these terrorists and appeasing Iran, that no matter what you show them is never going to convince them.
Correct. And, I've been on a couple of meetings, off the record type meetings where people are trying to explain to us that you've got to convince the media, in America especially, that when Hamas tells you something, treat it with a tremendous grain of salt. They lie through their teeth constantly. And yet the American media buys into this thing. They buy into the destruction of a hospital that wasn't destroyed, that an errant rocket wound up in a parking lot and incinerated a bunch of cars, and that killed 500 people. And they get people to appear on camera saying, yes, we have the hospital was packed, and we have many wounded and many injured. It's all nonsense, and yet they do.
Not inside the propaganda war. They're very good at it. Unfortunately,
very good at it.
Years of experience where CNN and all these other media outlets, whatever they gave them, they took at face value. And part of the problem is, in the Arab world, you don't have a lot of reporters who are Arabic speakers, so they rely on Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and the Iranian authorities to tell them the news, and whatever they give them, they feed it to the public, not telling the public that this is all fed by the government.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. Part of the problem that exists.
It's a big part of the problem.
Anyway, you're going to lead the battle to sue Iran to help the 1,400, at least the American ones. Is that something, as a lawyer, as somebody who has the experience?
I can't get out of my own way. I'm still running a title insurance agency in New Jersey. I'm trying to be a father. I have 3 grandchildren here this year. I have 2 boys. One is at Reishi, no commercial intended. Another was a Shalvim, no commercial intended. Our oldest grandchild, Michal, got married in May, and her husband is at the Grus Kollel. They're living in Bayit Vegan. I try to take him out for lunch every year of Shabbos. And it's like, like playing house. I mean, I got married young too, but I don't look like they did at 21. I just didn't. She's got her hair tight, in in a bandana, and her husband, 21 years old, got his what I call the racing stripe tits showing through his white shirt, and they're living La Vida Voca, And we never thought of coming to Israel in the 50s or 60s when I graduated high school. We never. This is so far from us, and for them, it's another rite of passage. And Michal emailed me this morning, texted me this morning, said, "Can we go to the zoo this afternoon?" And I said, I get ready to reply yes, and she emailed me back again. Oops, made a mistake. I still have to work till 3:30. Let's forget about that for today. And this is a girl who's been coming to Israel since she's 7 years old. 7 years old. So we've done these ti'ulim together. It is just fascinating to see things through a person who you start with 13, 14 years ago, and now she's an adult. And here's the emes. In my family particularly, people talk about yichus, right? And what is yichus? In most conversations, who the rabbis were in your family and where they came from in Russia. Now, I go forward. I'm looking forward from Elisa to my daughters and my son and my grandchildren. That's my yichus. Because we were sitting at lunch the other day at brunch, and I looked at my grandson, my grandson-in-law, and my granddaughter, and I said, you guys were worth what Grandma and I went without. And that's how I view my life.
That's really. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said. I'm sure the rabbi said it too. He said it's not as important who your ancestors or who your descendants are.
Okay, I like that.
So, and I think there's a rabbinical version of it too, but for some reason the Abraham Lincoln one sticks in my mind. But I have to find the other one too.
So can I tell a slightly embarrassing personal anecdote?
Sure.
Okay. So my son gets us our meat from reliable butchers here in Jerusalem, and we invite Michal and her husband Aryeh to come for barbecue. And Michal says, "Where'd you get the meat? What's the hechsher?" Right? 20 years old. So Roz takes a picture of the label, and Michal calls her back and says, "You know what? I'll pick up the London broil." Sure, there's nothing wrong with it, but I'll pick up the London broil. So she brings this piece of meat, whatever it was. It may have said London broil with a sticker on it. Believe me, it's not London broil. It's not London broil. It was fine. It was fine. And I was complaining about that to my youngest daughter, Alana, who has 5 kids of her own, and whose kids are here, go back and forth with them all the time. And she starts laughing. I said, "What are you laughing at?" She says, "What are you blaming Michal for? Blame Elisa." That was her answer. Blame Elisa, right? She started it all. You went along for the ride. Now you're paying the price, But it's a microcosm of Jewish life.
We're all proud of our children, and we're proud of Israel, what it's doing, and all the soldiers, male, female, what they're doing to protect our country, going against all odds. Really. It's like Abraham was the first one who rescued his nephew Lot against all the. I went to war against the 4 kings. Okay, it's like there was a world war where the Israeli soldier is following in that tradition.
You know what? Someone very wise told me many years ago. I relayed that story about Lot, and I used that story mentioning the rescue of Lot to show why the Jews of America and Israel brought in the Ethiopians. They paid for the Russians, and they did this and they did that. And this fellow said to me after I spoke one morning, he said, "Take a look at what the Sforno says." Sforno says on that commentary about the stranger coming up to Abraham, he didn't know it was Lot. Sforno says all he heard was that there was a member of his family, a Jew, basically, an Ivri, who was in trouble. And that's what got him going. The fact that it was Lot, yes, we know that because we read what it said, right? And we know the aftermath. But the Sforno was saying that he didn't know that it was Lot when he got up from his tent.
So I'll give you the counter, which the Satmar Rebbe said, and I wrote Zionism. The Satmar Rebbe said that the only time in the Torah Avram is called Ivri is here because the survivor who was supposedly Og, because there's another version it was somebody else, but Og, who survived the flood, and he's the one that survived this world war. He knew that Avram was going to battle, and he would marry Sarah, had designs on Sarah. So therefore, how did he know? Because Avram was an Ivri. In Ivri, it's known that he's on the other side of the divide. He'll go to all odds to rescue one of his own, and he didn't think Avram would come back, but he didn't realize that Avram was going to come back. Not only that he would go, but he would come back with God's help. And with God's help, our Israeli soldiers in the spirit of Avram will come back and rescue the hostages and decimate the enemy, which deserves to be decimated. I hope the world allows Israel to do so, but we got to stand firm and resolute. And I want to thank you, Stephen Flatow, for all that you've done. I know your beautiful daughter Lisa was killed in 1995, but you channeled that into trying to hold Iran accountable and collecting money from Iran. Hopefully now we're going to renew that effort to hold Iran accountable. We got to deal with Hezbollah and with Hamas. You're a proud owner of Israel, and also now the head of the religious Zionists of America, the president, or Mizrahi. So we look forward to hearing a lot more Mizrahi in the U.S. because I think religious Zionism and Zionism in general needs a revival, a reboot, and hopefully this will spur us to educate our kids and ourselves to be more knowledgeable about what it's all about. So thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
How's Adina doing? What's Adina